Welcome everyone to Dr. Kipp's channel. I'm Mark Peralta, apostate of mind, infiltrating his channel. So proud to be here. How you doing, Dr. Kipp?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you, Mark. It's good to have you at my house. Uh, I am really I'm excited to see that you got yourself some new digs.
Yeah,
That looks amazing.
thank you. We've relocated and now got the benefit of having all the books behind me. So I was out of my garage, and so we've got a new space. And so yeah, there it is.
Now you look like an almost an honest to good genuine YouTuber with the bookshelves in the
Yeah,
background. It's
yeah. At the very least.
it's the
So
it's the way we do it, right?
yeah,
That's how it's done. So cool.
you got to judge
So
the book by the cover. So
that's right. That's right. Or the scholar by the number of bookcases.
there you go.
as I've come to learn. But honestly though, like you've been to I so um like just so people understand, and this is something that I've often been uh I don't have a ton of books. I really don't. My library is actually pretty small. Especially when you go to some of these, like my Dr. Fodder, Professor George Brooke. I was at his house many times while I was a PhD student, and he had, you know, cases of books in his office at the University of Manchester. But then in his house, there were bookcases in virtually every single room, including his office, and they were full. And I was like, "How on earth do you find the money to buy so many books?" But then I learned the secret that when you become an important enough academic, all the publishers just start sending you their
Mhm.
books, right? So, on a weekly basis, he'd get like 10 books in the mail. S you
Oh
know,
wow.
that's just one of the perks of being, a widely recognized, renowned scholar in the field.
Like
So,
yourself, not like me though.
well,
I had to
no,
pay for every one of these.
yeah. I can't say I paid for all of them, but I paid for quite a few of them. So, and yeah, I wish publishers were sending me, boxfuls of books every week. Oh wow, I wish that. So, yeah. Anyhow,
Well,
what are
Dr.
we
Kip,
doing?
yeah, why don't we, before we get started though, could you clear up for us what's
Yes.
with the title? Like, what are you saying
Oh,
there? I've got an idea, but
did you did you pick up there's this song, right? This
uh-huh.
is by the Iron Butterfly,
Okay.
In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida.
Yes.
It's in the Garden of Eden, but
Mhm.
and I don't I on I've seen it both ways. I don't know if they actually titled the song In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, but when they sing the song, it sounds like In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, baby.
Yeah.
You know, yeah,
And this
I
might be
won't sing
just
it.
conjecture though, but I heard that it was that the author or the composer was drunk.
Oh,
So
really?
he wrote it down this way, and then
That's
it
awesome.
got caught on or whatever. But
Well,
which
it's
I
it's
thought
a
was,
it's a hell of a song,
yeah,
and that's an even better story.
and an even better title, because I think
Mm.
there's a little bit of like craziness going on with some of these Bible interpreters
Uh,
that
yes.
perhaps maybe they were too drinking a little
So,
too much.
absolutely. Before we get into them, my dad, who is, I think, 82 years old now. When I was a kid growing up, he was a singer in a gospel quartet. They used to tour around the prairie towns in the area where I used to live, where I grew up. And they used to sing In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. But, because there were four pasty white guys in a gospel quartet, they sang "In the Garden of Eden,
Mm,
baby." So
that's right. They've redeemed the song.
they had to, right?
Yeah.
It was the only way. It's the only way they'd let him into church to sing it. So yeah.
Yeah, that works. So we communicated a few weeks back and
Mhm.
talked about how we really wanted to talk about uh, Genesis 3, that this the narrative of the fall of Adam and Eve, as we often titled it within Christianity. But and then more particularly this whole concept of the proto evangelium, which is referring specifically to verse 15, so 3:15,
Right.
um, because it's at least it was taught to me in seminary that this was the first gospel, the first good news, and that
The beginning of the gospel, yeah.
uh
Proto-evangelion, literally, right?
yeah, and that the seed that's described in that curse is apparently Jesus and the promise of his death and resurrection. So,
That's
yeah,
what we're told.
that's right.
So, it's, and this is one of the things, right? So, the reason the reason we think this is because, this is a theme that's picked up on by New Testament writers. And, it's it's a theme that is, I would say, um pretty typically Jewish as well. The early Christian writers, for the most part, I think, for much of these texts, are literate Hellenized Second Temple Jews, and they are reading the scriptures as any, as any Jewish reader was in the first century. And the one of the ways, maybe the primary usage of these texts at this time, was to mine them for significance and meaning for your present circumstances. And within early Judaism, within certainly the first century BCE into the first century CE, up to the destruction of the temple, and then the Bar Kokhba revolt, messianic movements, apocalyptic movements within Judaism were very prevalent. And as a result of that, there was uh, a good deal of engagement with the text of scripture in this sense. What does it mean for us today? What can this tell us about the last days, or the coming of the Messiah? So, um, you know, it's I will say, I think people come by this honestly. This is Christian doctrine. um, but as a scholar of the Bible, as a scholar of the Hebrew Bible, and someone who's interested in the transmission and the reception of these texts, I'm always prompted to also look backwards too, right? Like, what is this story actually about in its original context? Where did the story come from? And what is it doing in here in the book of Genesis.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because you're the right person to help us understand what that background story or context that we need to, as modern interpreters, keep in mind before we jump to any crazy conclusions. And there was a
Right.
whole gamut. I wrote a few down that I could perhaps share with your audience, in our audience. In the Targums, it seems like they're looking at the seed as a collective for all humankind, and I think that's what you were referring to.
Yeah.
in regards to the rabbinic commentators during those eras. But Christian interpreters have also had shared and mixed opinions. For example, Justin and Irenaeus interpreted the woman of 315 as the Virgin Mary,
Oh,
and
wow.
thus drawing a parallel with Eve directly, Mary and Eve. The Greek fathers, such as Chrysostom, viewed this text as a depiction of the struggle between Satan and humanity, um, while others interpreted the seed as the church. Among the Latin fathers, Augustine, with others, they are allegorized or moralized the verse, indicating a collective use, and others saw in it a specific reference to the virgin birth. This was aided by some old Latin texts and the Vulgate, which had the feminine pronoun
Wow.
um, "she shall crush," apparently.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, in the feminine rather than masculine. Ambrose, who first quoted 315 as not her seed, but the woman's seed. And among the reformers, Luther took her seed as a reference to both humanity in general and Christ in particular, while
Mm.
Calvin, he saw it as a collective, not to all humanity, but rather to the church under the headship of Christ, which would prove victorious. And he makes a reference to
How
Romans
about
chapter
that?
16. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, maybe should we just so we're sure everyone is on the same page, should we just take a look at what the text says first?
Yeah.
So I can just pull this up and share this with everybody. I'm just gonna provide the translation that I made of Genesis chapter 3. Um and this is the translation that I made for the chapter that I've written about this specific text that for the forthcoming book. So I thought maybe we could just start by reading it.
Beautiful.
Maybe let's do that, right? So I'll just start, and I actually start from uh the end of chapter 2 verse 25, because I think there's an important hinge in the narrative between 225 and chapter 3 verse 1 that people quite often miss. So just to set the stage, Yahweh has formed the man out of the dirt. He made the animals and brought them to him to see what he would name them. The man was unable to find a suitable helper, so Yahweh put him into a deep sleep, took out a rib, fashioned a woman out of it, and brought it to him. And he he enjoyed her. And then the text says, you know, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his woman, and they shall be one flesh. And then the next sentence, it says this: so the two of them were naked, the Adam, or the man, and his woman, and they were not ashamed. And then it opens in chapter 3 like this: now the Nachash, or the snake, or the serpent, was more clever than all the animals of the field that Yahweh God had made. And he said to the woman, has God also said to you that you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? Now, before we continue, I do want to point out here that this first word, naked, where it says that the man and his woman, the Adam and his woman, were naked. This word in Hebrew is arum. Um, in the plural, it's arumim, and they were not ashamed. And then when it says that the snake, or the Nachash, was more clever than all the animals of the field, it says that he was more arum. It's a clear play on words here between the snake's resourcefulness and his cleverness and the nakedness of the man and the woman. And I think it's an important point that carries with it implications for our understanding of deity, implications for our understanding of the relationship between knowledge and sex, and between sex and immortality. So these are all very important themes within this story. So the snake asked the woman this question: Has God said that you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? The woman responded to the Nachash, From the fruit of an ordinary tree of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden. God said, Do not eat from that one, do not even touch it, or else you will die. The Nachash said to the woman, Surely you will not die. For God knows that on the day that you eat of it, then your eyes will be opened and you will become like gods, knowing good and bad. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasing to the eyes, and it was desirable to make wise. So she took from its fruit, she ate, and she gave to her man with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of the two of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves and made loincloths for themselves. Then they heard the sound of Yahweh God walking about in the garden in the wind of the day. And the Adam, the man and his woman, kept themselves hidden from the face of Yahweh God in the middle of the tree of the garden. And Yahweh God called to the Adam, and he said to him, Where are you? And he said, I heard your sound in the garden, and I was afraid because I am naked, so I hid myself. He responded, Who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from the tree from which I forbade you not to eat? The Adam said, The woman who you set beside me, she is the one who gave to me from the tree, and I ate. Then Yahweh God spoke to the woman, What is this that you have done? The woman responded, The Nachash, the snake, deceived me, and I ate. So Yahweh God said this to the Nachash. And what follows here is this set of curses that Yahweh delivers to the snake, to the woman, and then finally to the ground. So he says this: So you have done this. You are more cursed than all the livestock and all the animals of the field. On your belly you shall walk, and dirt you shall eat all the days of your life. Enmity I shall set between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will bruise your head, and you will bruise his heel. To the woman he said, I will make most severe your pain and your groaning. In agony you will deliver sons. Unto your husband shall be your desire, but he will rule over you. Then to the Adam, he said, Because you have listened to the voice of your woman, you ate from the tree of which I instructed you, saying, You shall not eat from it. The ground is cursed because of you. By your drudgery you shall eat from it all the days of your life. Thorn and thistle it shall sprout for you, but you will eat the grain of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, since you are dirt, and unto dirt you shall return. So that's the passage. Now we're gonna take a look and see how some of these guys handle it, talk about it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something further
Sure.
about the room that substantive that's used for the serpent.
Hmm.
Because what I've seen often is that it gets translated to another word that means like crafty or
Crafty, clever,
yeah, clever.
wise.
But I feel
Yeah,
like it oftentimes sort of carries with it, especially the crafty one on the NASB, that sounds a little
guile,
on the negative side. Like,
right? It's guile.
yeah, yeah,
Is sort of the thought, right? So it's a really clever, and I don't know what to do with that. I honestly have no idea, and it's one of those things, right? Like we judge words based on based on their usages within ancient texts as best as we can understand them. So I don't know if this is guile or if this is just insightfulness. um Now I think it's a brilliant image in view of the story here, because and this is a point that I make in the course that I teach on Israelite religions, and this is also a point that I'm making in the book. uh, it's from another book that I can't remember the title or the author offhand, but I picked this up in something I read years ago. But I think that this connection is deliberate, in large part based on the fact that that snakes on a regular basis will shed their skins, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
almost they're almost like the naked animal in the wild, and ancient people from a variety of cultures had all sorts of interesting ritualistic ideas with regards to snake skins. Snakes were um, magical beings, really, in a variety of texts and cultures. You know, all of this stuff is built into this image and this play on words here. You know, the nakedness of the snake is connected to his his cleverness or his guile. I don't know which way you want to go. I mean, there's a, you know, I could uh, 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 a a Christian reader will look at this text and will say, well, he's being duplicitous, or he's being, um, you know, he's and I to be clear, I don't think that the snake character in this story is intended to be a good guy either. Like, he's not. This is not a character in the story who has the best interests of the humans in view. I don't think so. I don't think that's how he's being presented. Although I also don't think that this creature is the embodiment of pure evil, right? Like,
Right.
so, and I'll just point this out as well. Within many, in particular within the uh, the Near Eastern, particularly nomadic cultures, from the region, one of the things that we see that is championed is trickery and cleverness. You know, the whole cycle of the stories of Jacob that appear in the later part of the book of Genesis, in particular, in, you know, starting in like Genesis 22, I think, um, into the 30s. Uh, Jacob is very often championed for being a clever man who gets the best of people who are in positions of greater power
Hmm.
than he is. This is a common theme. This is a trope that appears in particularly the later parts of the book of Genesis. And I think this makes sense too. Within a culture where particularly these nomadic cultures which were roaming around, you know, in the vicinity of these large, imposing, powerful Canaanite cities, they're the little guys. They're the
Mhm.
outsiders. In order to get by, sometimes you have to take advantage of those who are in positions of greater authority and power than you are. So this isn't necessarily a vice as far as the biblical author is concerned, right? Guile and cleverness is something that that is lionized in a lot of texts. You know, Jacob dupes his older brother into giving him his birthright. He dupes his father-in-law, Laban, into acquiring the best part of Laban's flocks and his holdings. Uh, you know, this is part of the narrative, part of the story. In fact, the name Yaakov in Hebrew comes from a verb, you know, the cognates of which in Akkadian It's either Akkadian or Ugaritic, actually means to trick or to deceive. So it's it's a good question. It's a good point that you raise. But I don't know if we have an appropriate understanding of the value that people from antiquity, when they read this story in its original context, if they would have set the same sorts of values on some of these ideas. I suspect probably not in many instances.
Yeah. So when you mentioned the whole skin of the snake,
Uh,
it reminds me of another epic from antiquity that it specifically describes a snake leaving behind its skin. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, I take
yeah.
it that Gilgamesh sees that as evidence of that the plant really did do its job as he was told,
Right? Yes.
right?
You
He
know, it's
realizes that,
the snake is shedding is he's leaving behind the old self, right? He's become basically almost like a new creature, a revived new creature. So, yeah, it's
yeah.
you know,
So it,
one of the remarkable things just in examining these texts, these ancient pieces of literature, and looking for these intertextual connections with other ancient Near Eastern texts, and then internally as well within the Bible, it's really remarkable how many you can find and how rich they are. It, it's amazing literature.
now, Dr. Kipp, if we were able to sort of roll the clock back 2,000 years
Mhm.
ago, could you provide sort of like an overview of the significance of this particular text within the broader context of that culture?
So, I think so. Um, I think that's it's. I guess people were reading. I mean, there's a few things that are going on. People are reading these texts in an effort to gain a clear understanding, still, about their place in the world and the origins of humanity, and they are encountering um gaps or problems within these stories that then also um they need to sort out how to resolve, right? For example, one of the things that you'll encounter, and this is, I think even still today, this is something that troubles a lot of people. God promised in the when he first spoke to the man, he said, on the day that you eat from the tree that's in the middle of the garden. I think it's interesting in the first place that he doesn't identify it specifically as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He just says the tree in the middle of the garden. Um, but we know that there were two trees in the middle of the garden. There was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. When God says, "You shall not eat from this tree that's in the middle of the garden," if you eat from this tree that's in the middle of the garden, you're going to die. You're definitely going to die, is what the text says. On the day that you eat of it, you are definitely going to die. And of course, that didn't happen, right?
Hmm.
Modern commenters, modern Christian commenters who feel the need to take this text very I don't particularly like to say literally, but plainly, and historically, as if this is something that actually happened.
Hmm.
In order to preserve the reputation of God, also need to say they need to come up with solutions for how this can be. Like, God couldn't have told a lie, So there's got to be something else going on here, and they'll invent sort of similar, ways of
Yeah.
working through the text like that. And ancient people did the same thing. So this was a question that was raised in I think this was a question that was brought up in the life of Adam and Eve, which is an early Jewish composition that greatly expands on this story, right? In an effort to resolve what early readers saw as problems with the text. So they're looking at it for information. They're trying to solve problems, um, and they're also I don't know about this specific story, and I haven't done enough work specifically on what was happening in outside of the early church in in other parts of Judaism with this particular text, beyond something like the life of Adam and Eve, or something like the book of Jubilees, which is conflating, right, the Genesis 1
Mhm.
story with the Genesis 2 story. And then the priority there for the writer of the book of Jubilees is to reconstruct this all within this very important lunar calendar, right? So this is the sorts of things that the sorts of questions that Jewish readers at the time of Jesus were asking of the text. But
Mhm.
far and away, the New Testament provides us the most extensive evidence of a sort of apocalyptic, eschatological, or messianic understanding of the story.
And then with regards to like what Yahweh tells Adam and Eve, it really does seem like the simple reading is that he lied. He didn't really tell the truth because uh,
Yeah,
so
and
is it
y
I
and
was gonna
and I
say is it
think we no, go ahead.
I was
Sorry.
gonna say, is it possible that initially, because like I'd say modern readers would take issue, like if they believe in the omniscient God, God can't lie, kind of perspective, that you would immediately be hit with this dilemma and therefore try to come up with some sort of way to explain it away. But is it possible that early on that was not the case?
Um, yeah, now I think you can look at this a couple of different ways, right? Is is Yahweh he's is he directly is he uh sorry, is he performing a misdirection? Um,
Hmm.
is he telling them something? Because that's like one way to look at this is he's so determined that oh, sorry, my my friend Michael, the Canadian atheist, is here, and he has noticed my t-shirt. So
Nice.
that's the for all y'all Americans out there, this is the logo for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Oh wow, very creative.
Yes. It's good, eh? Yeah, I
Nice.
think it's a nice logo. The CBC. Anyways, uh the sorry, where was I? So there's a couple different ways you can look at this. Is God um performing a sort of hyperbole? I've seen it read this way,
Hmm.
where he could be saying something like, if my kid, my second oldest, has a tendency to just take things, and borrow them that don't belong to him. He'll oftentimes just grab my shoes because they fit him, which is really annoying when you're trying to leave the house and your shoes aren't there because he's wearing them. Things like this, right? So, it wouldn't be unusual for me to say to my son, if you take my shoes, I'm going to kill you. Or if you take my bike for a ride without asking me, I'm going to kill you. Um, so is this what God is doing? Is he saying, if you eat of this tree, you're gonna die? Um, as a means of just emphasizing the cruciality of how much he doesn't want this to happen? Or is this a form of misdirection because he's doing something deceitful? Like, do you see the
Mhm.
difference here?
Yeah, I can totally make sense of that as well.
And I, I
Uh,
I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I think you can go in either direction. Um, but what I would say is, if you're taking the text seriously, you have to concede that what it was that Yahweh said to the man didn't happen, right? Was wrong. It was not the results that the man was told. And I expect, the man understood when God told him in this story, if you eat from the tree that's in the middle of the garden, you're going to die. I think our expectation should be that this is what the man heard. Yeah, if I
yeah,
do that, it's going to kill me, right? So, I think that it is a misdirection, clearly. Whether or not it's a noble misdirection, I think that's up to the interpreter. Um, I think the writer of this story in the first place probably didn't see this, again, the same way necessarily we would, as God lying. Um, and probably the best background text for understanding what's happening, particularly with this piece, with God telling the Adam one thing and something else happening. Maybe the
okay.
best background bit for that is the very, very old story, Adapa and the South Wind. And I know this is one you're familiar with. You've been reading
I'm fascinated
this
by
one a
it.
little bit, right? Yeah, it's an amazing story. And what happens in that story? Like, when Adapa has to appear before Enlil,
Anu,
uh Anu, sorry,
Anu.
and then it's Enlil, or is it Ea? It's
Yeah.
Enlil who
eh,
so he has to appear before
yeah.
Anu. What does Enlil tell him?
He says, "Listen, you're gonna encounter a couple of people along the way that are gonna offer you some clothing, anointing, I guess some oil for
Mhm.
anointing, and then some bread and water,
But what does he
and
call it? He
the bread of
calls it,
life and the water of life."
uh well, I think he calls it, when he tells Adapa, he calls it the bread of death, doesn't he?
That's
So
right. Yeah,
let me
but
pull it up here. Because I have it. Just give me a second. It's further
while
on
you pull
here.
it up, can I tell
Yeah,
the
yeah.
background to
Yeah,
this?
for sure. Yeah.
So yeah, because it's fascinating. I recommend everyone should read it. So Adapa is not necessarily like the first Adam per se, but it's like this
No.
a sage, right? One of the
Yeah.
first seven sages or something. It's definitely though antediluvian, right? So this is prior to the flood in this mythology, and he's sort of like the leader um, of a town already, and like the whole town relies on him for water and for food and for wisdom. And one of the things that he does on a daily basis is he goes out on a boat to fish.
Yeah.
And one day he's out in the middle of the ocean, and it says the water is like a mirror, so that means it's very still. And all of a sudden, a wind coming from the south capsizes his ship. He nearly dies, but he survived enough to come out, and he's very upset because this happened, right? And in his anger, he pronounced what appears to me like some sort of curse, and that he curses the south wind. In other words, the wind that caused his ship to capsize.
Yeah.
And he was successful because it says that the wind didn't blow for 7 days. By this time, though, the main god, the storm god Anu, takes notice that, hey, what's going on with the south wind? And then someone gives him away. It says, oh yeah, Adapa cursed the wind and stopped it. And so the main god, the storm god, is like, okay, we need to summon this guy immediately. Like, why did he do this? And so he summons Adapa to heaven, actually. So he's somehow got to make his way up to heaven. But meanwhile, the god Ea, who was his creator, and Adapa had he worshipped Ea, and they had very
Hmm.
close relationship, approaches him and says, hey, listen, you're being summoned to heaven, and they're going to offer you these things. And by the way, the bread and the water will kill you, so do not eat of
Yeah.
them. It's all right with the anointing oil and the clothing, whatnot, but don't take the bread and the water. And so then he's eventually summoned to heaven, and he rejects the bread and the water.
Yeah. He actually, so
Um,
here I'll
but
read
then
it
yeah,
here. It says, yeah, when they offer you bread of death, you shall not eat. When they offer you water of death, you shall not drink. When they offer you a garment, put it on. When they offer you oil, anoint yourself. This advice that I have given you, neglect not. The words that I have spoken to you, hold fast. And then when he goes to present himself before Ea, they give him a garment. They give him oil to anoint himself. They give him bread and water, and he refuses them. And then this is what Anu says to him. He says, "Come now, Adapa, why did you either eat nor drink? You shall not have life. Ah, perverse mankind." So clearly, you know, there's misdirection going on here on the part of Ea, right? Ea has told him, he's told him these things are going to kill you, so you can't eat them. When in actual fact, these are the elements that would give him immortality. It's very very similar, I think, to the dynamic that's taking place. What's happening between the couple in the garden and Yahweh. Um,
and an
now I
intermediary that's providing some wisdom.
Yes, yes. Like here, I'll just read a little bit from where I talk about this in my book. I say Ea's trickery could be seen as malicious, telling him keeping keeping Adapa from immortality. How cruel, right? Um Adapa is intelligently designed. Like one he's this figure who is absolutely indispensable to the city of Eridu. And here's what the text says about him. It's really quite beautiful. Wide understanding he had perfected for him, for Adapa, to disclose the designs of the land. To him he had given wisdom, eternal life he had not given him. In those days, in those years, the sage from Eridu, Ea created him as the model of men. The sage, his command, no one can vitiate. The capable, the most wise among the Anunnaki is he. The blameless, the clean of hands, the anointment priest, the observer of rites. With the bakers, he does the baking. With the bakers of Eridu, he does the baking. Bread and water for Iridu daily he provides. With clean hands, he arranges the offering table. Without him, the table cannot be cleared. He steers the ship. He does the prescribed fishing for Iridu. Like the whole point in this substantial part of the opening section of this is this story is to establish um Adapa's indispensability, right? Iridu needs him. Ea sees that Iridu needs him. So, and he knows that as soon as Adapa partakes of the bread and water of life, he becomes immortal. He becomes a god. He can no longer do these things for Iridu, right? So he's trying to look out. He's got a bigger picture in mind here. And I tend to think maybe this is kind of what's happening in this story In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida.
Yeah. I see that they're both sort of dealing with very similar dilemmas because
Yeah,
uh, the way that I like to describe it is that there's a price to be paid for partaking of both the knowledge of good and evil, or wisdom in this case,
yeah,
and just being alive, because you can't be like the gods and partake of immortality as well, because then that gets you into some trouble, which I think Genesis doesn't really get into those details, but it's sort of like coming from the
it's
same, right?
you can see it between the lines though, right? I think you can. And now so there's a couple things now throughout a lot of this this ancient Near Eastern creation literature, there are two stages. There are two things to becoming divine. It's this acquisition of knowledge or wisdom, right? And then it's this acquisition of immortality. It
Mhm.
requires the both of them together. So that's why, the story in Genesis 2 opens by telling us that in the garden there's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and there's the tree of life. So the man has been prevented from partaking of the one of them. And I personally think that the presence of the tree of life is concealed from the people because they don't possess the knowledge of good and evil. So, until until they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they don't even know that the tree of life is, or that it's a thing. So, and this sort of explains the urgency of God at the end of the story, right? He says, look, the man has he's eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He's become like us. Now what would happen if he took of the tree of life and lived forever? So suddenly this is an issue. And I think, it's not explicitly stated, but I think the implicit message therein is that without the knowledge of good and evil from the one tree, the other tree just isn't an issue, right? They just don't know to eat from it. But now suddenly this is potentially a problem. So um and I think too, uh we need to gain a clearer understanding of like who the man and the woman are, what this place is and what they're doing there. Without going into great detail, the Garden of Eden is not like this natural uh wooded paradise that was designed for the people. I think that's a mistake that readers make when they encounter this story in the first place. They think that the garden was made for the people,
Yeah,
and
like there
that's
was a
not it.
perfect place that God had in mind.
And that
Um,
he made it for them, that it
right.
was theirs. It's not. It's in fact in other places in in the Bible, it calls it the garden of God. This is Yahweh's garden, and
Mhm.
it's probably imagined by the writer of this story as like a sculpted urban garden, or like a temple garden. There's a lot of ritualistic sort of imagery within the text, which indicates that there's maybe some cultic overtones here. It's a sacred space of some sort, but God makes the man specifically to till and to keep it. It's his job to keep the garden maintained, right? So he's kind of like Adapa, in the sense that it's his job, like Adapa's job is to look after Iridu and make sure everyone in Iridu is doing okay and the city's working and everybody has enough, right?
Mhm.
In the same way, Adam's job is essentially to ensure that God's garden is kept and tilled. Um, and then, once he's eaten from the tree of knowledge, this is now like he's in the station really as an oblate or like a palace or a temple slave. And now that he's eaten from the tree of knowledge, he's become like the gods. So he's no longer like he's moved up a rung, and this has now made him unsuitable to continue looking after the garden, right? And then there's this inherent danger, this inherent concern that if he then eats from the tree of life, he will be a god. Like he's halfway there, right? He's now taken a step up from oblate to, you know, like the gods, but not quite the gods. That requires
Mhm.
the step of immortality, eating from the tree. So I think I'll just read this bit here, um where so this is where I see the similarity with the story of Adapa and the South Wind. I say, Adapa's wisdom has perfectly suited him to the task of looking after Eridu. He is the model of men, as the text says. He is indispensable to Ea. And I think this helps to flesh out some of the detail in Genesis 2 to 3. The Adam was created for the earth, that is, like to work the ground, right?
Right.
More specifically, he was created to cultivate and look after the garden of God. Now, when this station is jeopardized by his acquisition of knowledge, like a god, he can no longer stay in the garden. The man and the woman are banished, but a bit of a subversive way. They're also emancipated, like they're no longer um confined to this space to work for the god, to work Yahweh's garden.
Sure.
They're free from the slavery of the garden. They become their own masters, slaves to their own destiny. What does the text say? In Genesis 3:18, he says, "By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread." So
Mhm.
I think when an ancient reader looked at the story, because this is what they did all day long, right? They were all working out in the fields, scratching out a living for themselves as best as they could, and it's hard work. But there's a nobility in the labor of, keeping your family alive, of looking after yourself. The task of survival in the hill country, the Judean hill country, outside of the Canaanite cities, it's hard, it's unpleasant, it's unforgiving, it's work. But within that, there's also a sense of freedom, a sense of, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's self-determination,
Mm.
right? Like that's part, I think that's part of the story that many skeptical readers, when they look at this and they go, "Oh, this is terrible. Look at what an awful God Yahweh is for treating people like this and for kicking them out of this paradise." I think this is the part that they miss. There is a a certain sort of self-determination that's built into this sentence.
Mhm.
God's sending them out of the garden, but he's sending them out to look after themselves, which is what all parents do with their kids.
Mhm.
When mine are at the age now, right, where they're just kind of, half of them are here, half of them are already. out the door, but the goal is eventually that my wife and I will have the house to ourselves.
Yeah, same here. And I also I like the way that the is it the Atrahasis, the way they paint the picture, or at least what I'm interpreting from reading the Atrahasis, which is another one of those ancient Babylonian Sumerian epics, is the way they phrase it is like when the gods did the work, like
Yeah, yeah,
man's
right.
labor is what the gods used to do. They just got tired of doing it, and they created us so that we could take over, but we're doing the work of the gods. um
And yeah, and that is what that is what ancient people quite often reflected on in their writings was the genius of humanity in terms of you know our ability to build and to create and to
Mhm.
to reproduce and these sorts of things. And maybe that's where the certainly the I think the non-priestly source of Genesis is kind of a unique ancient Near Eastern story, where it's sort of the only one that's kicking against that a little bit. uh the you're within those early chapters of Genesis, unlike something like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the city of Uruk is like it's like the
The big
it's kind of
metropolis.
like the here yeah and it's kind of like the hero of the story too, right?
Mhm.
you know um Gilgamesh sets out to find the secret, to find eternal life, which for him I think is really um sort of the meaning of life. He wants to, if he's going to live, he wants to live forever, kind of thing. And in the end discovers that no, it's in this great city that I've built. It's in my legacy in Uruk that this is the resolution, right? So but the book of Genesis is different. It's not in the city. It's not in these monumental accomplishments of humanity. The
In fact,
message of
may it be, is it fair to say that Genesis, is it 12, the Tower of
yeah,
Babel, is that a polemic
that's
against the
11.
city, or
Yeah.
11?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's 11, but it's all throughout there too, right? Like, after they're kicked out of the garden, which is, an urban space, um, Cain kills Abel, is the first murderer, and he's also the first man to build a city. We read in Genesis chapter 4.
Mhm.
And then in Genesis chapter 11, the people bring themselves together to build the city of Babel, and God has to spread them all out again. And then even throughout the rest of the narrative, Abraham, what does he do? He leaves the city of Ur, which is probably Uruk,
It's, yeah, or
and
very next
spends
to
the
it.
rest yeah, he spends the rest of his life like wandering around as a nomad. His nephew Lot goes and settles in the cities of the plains, and they end up being destroyed. It's
Mhm.
just it is over and over and over throughout this text. In particular, I think throughout the non-priestly source of Genesis, this message that you have to get yourselves out of the cities and take yourself into the hill country and build a life for yourself and your family just off the land. It's kind of part and parcel of this story.
Yeah, in that city of Uruk, I think, wasn't it like up until the Iron Age, wasn't it maybe one of the most important cities?
Yeah,
I heard someone even say
absolutely.
that until Rome, it was like the biggest, the most important city. So it's like, but
I don't know about that
maybe
late,
not
but
that
yeah,
far, but
definitely. And for a very long time, like it was a city that was thousands of years old already, like by by the time these texts were written. It's crazy. So yeah.
Now, I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier about sacred space,
Yeah.
and more particularly to what is often a misinterpretation, or something that most Christian readers do when they read this chapter, is they sort of presuppose that Adam and Eve were first created immortal, or in some
Mm.
sense, a death, as you read Romans, had not entered the world yet. So what does that mean? And is that really what Genesis says? What's really happening?
So, importantly, no, and I'm gonna look at let's look at what's going on. Sorry, I have to get back to the text here. Uh, we really have to look at how this story finishes. So as I mentioned, the assumption is because I was just arguing with someone on YouTube about this earlier today. Because the text in Genesis, actually, let's put yours on the screen here,
Okay.
and let's go back to Genesis 2:15, I think, thereabouts, or maybe even a little earlier than that. So Genesis 2, oh, there, stop. Genesis 2, 7, 8, 9, thereabouts. It says, okay, here. Um, and Yahweh God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there um, he put the man whom he had formed out of the ground. Yahweh God made grow every tree that is pleasant. Uh, sorry, I lost. That is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then I think he makes the man after that, right? So notice again, notice what I had pointed that this out sort of towards the beginning, that these two trees, like, they're together, they're connected, right? They're
Right.
importantly, it yeah. So there's this geographical description of the land. We can skip over that down to like 2:15. He takes the man, he put him in the garden to till and to keep him, and then he gives him this commandment: you may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you may not eat from it, for in the day that you eat of it you shall die. So there's the commandment, and people will often look at this text and say, well, the tree of life was in the garden, and because he didn't specify you can't eat from this tree, they must have been eating from it, and that's the source of their immortality. Therefore, um, they were immortal. Well, that's not really what the text says. And if we go to sort of the end of the story after Yahweh issues the curses. And now I'm reading from chapter 3. I think this starts in verse 22. I'll read verses 22 to 24. And this is my translation again. Then Yahweh God said, see now, the Adam, the man, has become like one of us, knowing good and bad. So what prevents that he might stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life, eat and live forever? So Yahweh God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from where he was taken. He drove out the Adam and stationed on the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming whirling sword to guard the way of the tree of life. So importantly, like, look at what God says here. Uh what prevents that he might stretch out his hand and take also? You could also translate this, and take now from the tree of life, eat and live forever. So, based on what Yahweh says, it seems clear to me that Adam and his woman have not yet eaten from the tree of life.
Mhm.
Uh, because he makes this declaration. What if he does it now? Now that he knows, good and bad, what if he now eats from the tree of life? So it's a subtle point, but it's a really important one, I think. This idea that, and that's also why I think the the command, the instruction by God when he says, if you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Uh they understand. I think because they were mortal beings, they understood that they weren't going to live forever already. So it's not like this was the removal of immortality. In fact, that actually doesn't make the story work. Not really. Not if you're looking at it um in the context of the broader ancient Near Eastern world, where you have these features, right? The pursuit of immortality and, and divine knowledge or divine wisdom. It's always a pair. um and if you're seeing the same thing in this story, which I think we should, given that, it's there, let's treat it like we would these other stories, and in conversation with these other contemporary stories, then, you know these are mortal beings, and the concern is that they are going to become immortal, and the way to prevent them from doing so is to prevent their access from the tree of life. So
Right.
yeah,
So it's
it's
because they lose access to this tree, which perhaps prior to the meeting of this other tree, they were too innocent to abuse that power, so to
I
speak.
think so. I think
Yeah.
it's the way I see it, because that's the other thing too. The other point made multiple times through this story. What actually happens to the couple when they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? The text says that their eyes were opened,
Right.
right? So to me, that communicates something about them. Like, yes, that's a colloquialism. It's metaphoric for, attaining this knowledge, this great insight. But I think there's probably something very tangible in that too, that they could see things that they couldn't see earlier. Their eyes were open, and suddenly they were aware of this other tree. Not, whether or not, now I haven't worked this out, right? Like in the between the lines of the story. So whether or not, I don't necessarily think that means that the tree was invisible. I tend to think that they just had no awareness of its significance. So now, with the acquisition of knowledge of good and bad, they do, or at least they will come to understand its
Mhm.
significance, right? Like, it's without that knowledge of good and bad, there's no concern that they're ever going to understand what the tree of life does.
Gotcha. So it's not their disobedience that brought about the death.
No.
The possibility of death is what they usually try to teach you.
Yeah, that
Uh,
well, and that's how the Christian that's how Paul, and that's how, you know, the New Testament writers understood this story, right? They're
right.
they're turning its message on its head, and which is what Jewish interpreters were wont to do. I'm gonna take this off because we don't really need it anymore. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. There we go. Um, but you know, I think I pointed this out on David McDonald's podcast when I talked about Genesis 2 and 3, and it blew his mind. Um, like, there's no sin in this story. The
That's another thing.
words,
Yeah.
the words for sin or transgression in the Hebrew Bible do not appear in this text. It's not there. Um, and what was the other one? So there's no sin in the story, and there's no fall, right? Like it's that's also a concept or an idea that's rather foreign to this text. This is something I learned very early on when I started university. Um, was that the Christian concept of iniquity or sin or the fall of mankind uh was here in Genesis chapter 3, but that from a Jewish perspective it was much different. This is not how they read this text. In fact, a better place to locate original sin for a Jewish reader is probably in Genesis 6 with the daughters of men being taken by the sons of God, and them bearing these gigantic offspring. And then the text says that they multiplied all manner of wickedness, impurity, and violence in the land. You know that's sort of the first the first big problem.
Okay.
um so anyways, yeah.
Another one of those little misinterpretations that I like to highlight is, what about the serpent? Like,
Mm.
we have lots of Christian commentators, and I'm pulling up.
Who is this?
This is from Bruce Waltke.
Oh,
These are,
okay.
these are the guys I read while I was in seminary. Here, I don't know if has it popped up yet.
Yeah, it's there. I can
It's
I
there.
can see
Okay.
it. Yeah.
So he says, where'd it go? One second. Says, in the ancient Near East, in varying contexts, serpents are symbols of protection, like the Egyptian Uraeus, of evil, deadly poison, like Apopis, of fecundity, like
Yeah,
the Canaanite fertility goddess, or of continuing life, renewal of skin, which is what we talked about earlier.
that's right.
He says, here the serpent is a symbol of anti God. Although not named here, he is the adversary of God and humanity, called the Satan. And then he goes on to elaborate uh, his case. But is it really Satan here? What are we looking at?
Well, the New Testament certainly alludes to this, right?
Okay.
But again, this is not native to the text. And the serpent, I think, is probably a divine being of some sort. Like, I think there's a couple different ways you can go. Uh and because it's such a rich, complex story, I think you can that all of this stuff is still um built into the text. So on the one hand, this is an etiology. This is a story which helps to explain aspects of life, uh things that people do and the reasons for them. You know, stuff that's addressed in this text. Why do we have to work so hard? For our food. Farming sucks. Why do we have to do it? That's answered in this story. Why why is it so painful for women when delivering children? So difficult for them.
Hmm.
That's answered by this story. Excuse me. Snakes, I think you could see as natural natural pests for farmers and for pastoralists and agriculturalists, right? So some of that is built into this story too, as part of the curse on the snake. He says, there will be enmity enmity between your offspring and the offspring of the woman, he, that is the offspring of the woman, will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. So, and this is how, there were medieval Jewish commentators who understood the text in this fashion, and they would say, snakes have to strike at the heel of a human being, but can still kill him in that position, but has to do so because he's stuck crawling on his belly on the ground. And this is an explanation for that. So
Yeah, it's
that's
kind of
one
like
side of this.
how come the lizard doesn't have legs anymore, or this particular
Right.
one lost its legs?
Yes, and
You
importantly,
know.
like that is part of later Jewish tradition as well, that the snake had limbs and was delimbed in the
Mhm.
process of the curse. Even though that's not in the text, that's what some Jewish commentators thought about this into the medieval period, right? So that's one side of it. Is this etiology that helps to explain? There's another one I thought. Why are we ashamed by our own nakedness and the nakedness of others to the point that we have to cover up and wear
Mhm.
clothes, like things like that, right? Um, so what separates us from the animals?
That's
Uh,
that's an interesting contrast that I want to make with the Adapa and the South Wind. Is
mm,
that it seems like it's protocol in the Adapa myth that whoever's approaching the god, as you would expect, like someone being summoned by the king, that you have to come in dressed in a certain way. So one of the things, the first thing that he does is he gives them royal clothing
yes,
before Adapa
yeah,
gets to get even close to Anu. But in here, Yahweh doesn't seem to have a problem with Adam and Eve walking around naked.
no. Um, I think I tend to look because this text is working on multiple levels, right? Um, uh,
Mhm.
I'm going to pull this up, and just because I saw it, and I'll just respond to this quickly. Um, it's the verb can either be bruise or strike. Um, you know, it's but importantly, I think it's important to note it's the same verb that's used for the seed of the woman and the snake. So they're doing the same thing to each other,
That's
right?
important
Just
because
to
I've
the
heard.
head and the heel. Well, and like this is Paul, right? He says something about soon the God of peace will crush
Crush,
the head of Satan under your foot. So,
but that's not what's
there's
in mine here.
that's not really what's in view here. I think the rabbinic commentators probably understood this etiological elements of the story along with a variety of the other ones. Well, with regards to the clothing, I was going to say in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is another story that has a lot in common um with the Adam and Eve story. And the Adam and Eve story is clearly in conversation with the Epic of Gilgamesh. But when the wild creature Enkidu um is he lives in the forest, right?
Mhm.
And he runs around naked, and he foils Gilgamesh and all of the hunters of Uruk. So when Shamhat, the prostitute, is sent into you know the solution for all the problems that Enkidu is causing Gilgamesh is for Gilgamesh to say, I know how to solve this problem. I'm gonna go send a woman into the woods to have sex with him. So, which, right away you're kind of like, what? But there's a connection here, right? Like what happens in the story is it says that Enkidu has sex with Shamhat the prostitute for 7 days and 7 nights. And then he gets up and all the forest creatures run away from him. And the first thing that Shamhat says to him is, "You have become wise, Enkidu, like a god. Come, let me take you to Uruk." And then she puts clothes on him and
Mhm.
takes him into the city. So, there's a connection here between this acquisition of knowledge and the need to cover up, to clothe yourself. And it seems to be something that in these stories takes place through through sexual intercourse. So, you
Hmm.
know and that's the other part of this story that we haven't touched on at all, and that's the sexual innuendo that's built into um the eating from the tree of
Hmm.
knowledge. The verb that's most commonly used by the non-priestly writer in Genesis for coitus, for sexual intercourse, is yada, which means to know. And I don't think this is an accident that it's the tree of knowledge of good
Mhm.
and bad. And there is some ambiguity here in the story about whether or not this was a sexual connection made between the woman and the snake, the serpent, the Nakash. In fact,
Yeah, I mean, serpents they behave very seductively.
yeah, right.
Mhm.
In fact, there's a one of the I believe it's one of the targums, the targum pseudo Jonathan um makes this connection pretty explicit. And I'll just pull this up for you. um It says that now in the Targum Pseudo Jonathan, it actually portrays the snake creature as a wicked angel named Samael in disguise. And uh it says, when the woman saw Samael, the angel of death, she was afraid. That's in Genesis chapter 3 verse 6. And as you read on through the story, God's reaction, the curses on the snake, the woman, and the ground, it's later revealed that Samael seduced the woman and had sexual intercourse with her. In Targum Pseudo Jonathan Genesis 4:1, it says
Hmm.
that Adam knew his woman Eve had become pregnant by Samael, the angel of Yahweh. She was desirable to the angel, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain and said, "I have created a man, an angel of Yahweh." So,
Oh, wow, it's like she
like
got her
Jew
own little tutorial. This is how
Yeah,
you
there
do
you
it.
go, right? Yeah, this is how it's done. Now, the reason why, let's put your accordance back up here, and go to Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Listen, the reason why the rabbinic commenters thought this is because of what happens in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. So this is on RSV, right? That
Yeah.
you have uh the man knew his wife. There's that word, yada, to know, his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, "I have produced a man with the help of the Lord."
There
Now,
it is.
this is what's interesting. There's a couple ways that you can actually translate this text. Um, you
Yeah,
could
my
just
guess is gonna
say,
be how that et is functioning here, right?
right, that could be a definite article. just the object. I have produced, I have created is a common a common way of translating this verb. In particular within other ancient Near Eastern creation texts, they'll use this verb kana, right? To
Mm.
create. So she says, I have created a man. This could be the object, Yahweh, um, which is kind of weird. The other way you
Right.
could read this too is I have created a man with Yahweh, not with the help of Yahweh, but just with Yahweh. And I think that's where the Targum is getting this idea, right? They're translate,
Mhm.
the Targum says, I have created a man, the angel of Yahweh. So it's clearly reading this text as if the woman has had a sexual encounter with the serpent, with the Nakash. And and there's certainly like lots of the imagery at play in the story with the tree is desirable. It's pleasing to the eye. Um
Mhm.
the image of eating is occasionally used in the Hebrew Bible as a metaphor for lust and for sexual gratification. So, part you know, it's kind of connected in there.
Yeah, and within the context of, hey, my command is for you to be fruitful and multiply,
Mhm.
right? Fill the earth. You'd think that a tutorial in how to reproduce would be helpful. It makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It
Um,
does. There you go. I won't oh, no, not that one. Okay. Cool. Well, did you want to we haven't even looked at any videos yet. Do you want to look at a couple of these?
so I think perhaps if we were to pick like the last one to sort of unravel here is what's really happening in verse 15,
Yeah.
because that's the one that oftentimes apologists or Christian commentators will say, yeah, look, the gospel was prophesied here, the coming of Jesus and his death and all that. It's in Genesis, and therefore you should believe it because it's the New Testament revealed in the Old Testament or whatever.
Yes. Yes, of course it
So
is.
I'd like to know like what's really happening here. I do have an example of how this
Sure.
eisegesis is done, and it's a 12-minute video. I could maybe try to speed it up and so we can watch it quickly, but I think it's just crazy to see it happening in real life. Just how
Okay.
these um what do you think?
So, now I'll say a couple of things. Like I think in Genesis 2:15, I lean much more strongly towards the ideological understanding of this text. But I think too there is something at play throughout the book of Genesis where part of what's happening here is this is setting up a recurring trope um in Genesis where you see uh this conflict between seeds, between offsprings, Cain and Abel, and then you see it um in Jacob and Esau. This struggle, it's there between Isaac and Ishmael. There's this ongoing concern throughout Genesis that there's going to be this conflict between the the I guess the preferred or the chosen offspring and the rejected offspring. I think that's I do think that it's starting to set up here in this text, and that does flow into this reading in Genesis 4, where Cain is the offspring of of this union.
Hmm.
He's the bad one, and Abel's the good one. And Abel is murdered and then is replaced, right, by Seth. So there's these lineages of this lineage that's favored by Yahweh, and this lineage that's rejected by Yahweh. It's not always directly genealogical, because you also see it in, like I said, another place is in like the curse of Noah, in, I think that's Genesis 9, where he gets drunk, and uh he ends up naked in his tent, and his two sons, Shem and Japheth, cover him. His third son, Ham, is disrespectful about the situation, and as a result, um, Noah curses Ham's descendant, Canaan, and says, "You're going to be a slave to your brothers, uh, which are really your uncles, Shem and Japheth, like the
Hmm.
rest of the days of your life," right? So it's this there's this repeating pattern of like blessing and cursing that I think starts here and
Hmm.
has to do with offspring. I don't think it goes much deeper than that. Um, other texts from the Bible, other Jewish commentators certainly pick up on this idea in terms of seeing the righteous line of David through like the house of Judah, and
Hmm.
you've got other prophecies to that effect, right? In places like in Genesis chapter 49, or in Numbers chapter 23, Balaam's oracle, right, with regards to with regards to the scepter and the star. So I think they're picking up on this idea that's already established in these early chapters of Genesis, of these lines of blessing and cursing. And the Davidic line kind of becomes the idealization of that.
Hmm.
But I would say that is, the picture of David, and in the line of Judah, and the scepter and the star prophecies are not these are later connections made by later readers, um to what starts in this story. um so I think maybe, to sum all that up, I'd say like the ideological reading, I think, is part of what's happening here, as well as setting up this conflict between these two lineages, right? The the
Hmm.
the blessing for one, and the curse to the other.
And at
Does
the
that make
very,
any
yeah,
sense?
totally. And at the very least, it's a materializ the whole curse is materialized, the whole enmity
Yeah.
between man and woman, perhaps between people,
Now, there is not
perhaps.
now, and I will say this too, there is absolutely is not a clear connection between this text and anything messianic, or anything to do with um the um yeah, the ruler of the last days. These are things
Yeah.
that end up getting layered on top, right? And Christianity leans into that. So, well, maybe let's watch this video, and you can speed it up a bit, and then we can maybe call it a night after that, eh?
All right. Sounds
This
good.
has been super fun, by the way.
15.
I'm glad.
This first gospel. We mentioned it yesterday. We're going to talk about it today.
All right. This is a new channel for me. I don't know this one.
Smooth transition.
Yeah, if you want to know more about it, his name's Brian Wolf Mueller, and he is a Lutheran pastor out of Austin, Texas. But he does a lot of like theology from the car sort of thing on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pew! Genesis 3:15. Here it is. Look, we even got out the bold tip for the Genesis 3:15, for the Proto evangelium, for the very first gospel, for the fountain from which flow all the messianic prophecies of the Old
All
Testament.
of them.
This
All of
text
them
here
flow.
is perhaps one of the most beautiful. And I would
He's
suggest
quite
the most
entertaining.
important to understand
Awesome.
the Old Testament, but it comes to us as a riddle. Now, remember the backstory. God created Adam and Eve in the garden, and here comes the devil to tempt them, the serpent, the dragon, it says in Revelation chapter 12. And Adam and Eve are now there. They reach and they take the fruit, they eat of the fruit, and there's a double death that occurs here. Don't worry. Even if I draw Adam and Eve unclothed, nobody knows the difference.
That's pretty cute.
So Adam and Eve are in the garden. They eat it, and they recognize that they are naked, and so they run and they hide.
So
From the
pause
Lord.
it for a second, because I should say something. He mentioned the double death.
Right.
I think right. I think what he's getting at here, and one of the common Christian readings of this text, the way that they encounter the way that they resolve this question of, you know, how is it that they didn't die on that day as God said? Well, one of the resolutions to that is, well, they died spiritually.
Right.
And I've seen that I don't know how common this is, but I've certainly seen it. This is less so among scholars because this is foolish, this is silly, but certainly Christian readers will look at the text. The Hebrew in that passage employs a feature of language called the infinitive absolute, which is a way of emphasizing the strength of the verb. And the way you do it is you use this this verbal feature, the infinitive absolute, connected to a verbal expression. So you're repeating the verb. And if you were to read it literally, as the translator of the Septuagint does, you would say, dying, you will die with death, or something like that,
Mhm.
right? So when I've seen some Christian commenters look at this text and say, well, it uses death twice, right? The verb is repeated. So one of these is actually spiritual death, and the other one is physical death, and it's going to happen way later. So, but
Well,
that's
yeah.
nonsense, okay? Anyways, let's.
The other one too was in there, the connection in from Revelation to the dragon. Isn't
Right,
that
yes.
a 7-headed dragon? Isn't that something else completely?
Oh, sure. Now that, and yeah, and that's now I think Revelation is connecting that dragon. I do think he's connecting that dragon to this story. Because it's the woman who gives birth, and the dragon is waiting to devour what the woman gives birth to, right? I think it's an allusion to this story, but that creature is they're also drawing from other texts in the Bible which mention the Leviathan,
Right.
this seven-headed serpent that you see it in Isaiah, you see it in the Psalms, you see it in the book of Job, you see it in in the Baal cycle
The
at Ugarit,
primordial
right?
monster, right?
Yeah,
But I don't.
it's this primordial chaos monster.
For me to conceive of a primordial monster in the garden, it doesn't make sense.
No, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And that's not who the Nachash in the garden story is. That's a later conflation of separate things.
Nice.
In the amongst the trees of the garden. Now remember that there, in the bushes, is Adam and Eve and the dragon, the serpent that's there with them. They're friends, and Adam and Eve are dressed in their fig leaves, etc. This, by the way, is the occasion of the funniest joke that I ever made, and it goes like this. So Adam,
Oh, I
after they
can't
get
wait.
their fig leaves on, Eve comes out from around the bush, and she says, Adam, what do you think? These are my fall colors. Fall colors.
Wow.
Anyway, this is the
Wow.
fall into
Yeah,
sin, and
haha.
one of the
Yes.
worst of all of the Bible
Ridiculous.
passages occurs right before this. Is that Adam and Eve hear the Lord walking in the sound of the Lord walking in the garden, and they hid themselves. And this hiding from God is in fact the first death. It's the spiritual death. Remember, God's
Wow.
No, that's so clear, isn't it?
Wow. So, I should say something else too about Yahweh walking in the garden. The form of the verb there is it's pretty unusual. It's not just him. The verb is halak, and very
Mhm.
common with enormous frequency throughout the Bible. When people are walking, it's just the regular strong verbal form. In Genesis chapter 3, it uses a conjugation. We call it the hitpael, which is usually it has a reflexive meaning, that it's something that you do to yourself.
Hmm.
In this instance, where it occurs with the word halak, meaning to walk, it seems like this is customary activity, as in this is the way, it's something that you do on a regular basis.
Hmm.
But the other really interesting thing about this form of the word is it's used in a couple of key instances. It's used here to describe what Yahweh's doing in the garden. It's used of Enoch in Genesis chapter uh 5 or 6. 5, 4 or 5. 5. Um, when Enoch walked with God and then he was no more, it's the same verb.
Mhm.
It's used of the Satan in the book of Job when God questions the Satan and says, where have you been and what have you been doing? He says,
Oh,
I've been walking around.
the whole through. What is it? I've been walking through and
Walking
fro,
around to and fro.
to
Yeah.
and fro. Yeah,
But
there you go.
it's the same form of the verb there. So I tend to think there is some connection of uh of this form of this verb to divine activity. So this is something that is connected to
And it
what
falls in
God is
line
doing.
with the anthropomorphic understanding of God from the
Yeah, that too,
Hebrew.
right? Like God walks
Mhm.
around in the garden and they hide from him, and he doesn't know where they are.
Right. Yeah.
said, on the day that you eat of it,
Maybe Yahweh had also died spiritually, and that's why he didn't know where they were.
dying, you will die. There'll be a double death, and this is the first
See,
death, running and
see,
hiding
he
from God.
said it.
We could
Dying, you
spend all
will
day talking
die.
about
There will
this, but
be a
we got to get
double
on to the
death.
text. So
No,
the
Yep.
Lord
no. It just the proper way to translate that is you will surely die, or you are definitely going to die. That's what the infinitive absolute does. Okay.
Nice.
calls Adam and Eve out from behind the bushes, and he stands them up in front of them. And now he's going to go down. So he's going to start with Adam, then Eve, and then the serpent. And
Well,
he's going to say
pause it for a
to
second. I'll,
Adam,
I'll just say
why
something
did you do
else
this?
quickly. That is, I think, kind of interesting. Is that the text also says that specifically that the man and the woman hid in the tree, like in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Which I
Oh,
I,
okay.
I don't know what to do with that, but it's kind of interesting.
Never thought of that.
Who
Yeah.
told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from, etc., etc.? Adam just say, the woman that you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit and I ate. So then Eve says, well, the serpent deceived me and I ate.
Mhm.
And then the Lord doesn't talk to the serpent. He doesn't ask the serpent anything at all. He just speaks to the serpent. And in verse 14 says, you got to go on the dust. You don't have legs anymore. But then 15, the Lord turns and speaks directly to Satan, to the devil himself, and he
Not to
speaks
Satan.
these
Right.
words.
Yeah.
Okay, so the I there, we got to identify the pronouns. I is the Lord. I will put enmity between thee, that is the devil, and the woman, Eve. Okay, so now, so it's God talking to the devil, and that's an amazing thing to us. that this first gospel message is spoken by the Lord to the devil. And we don't want to move too quickly past.
I mean, is that also to say that perhaps before this happened, that Adam and Eve were not at enmity with the devil? Like, what does that mean? Like,
Right. He even said it, that they were friends. But that is kind of strange.
it
That
is
is sort
pretty
of on a Christian understanding of this text, that is a bit of a strange reading, that they were all friends in the garden before this happened.
right.
I
And
don't
that's the
know.
thing when you stretch out these interpretations, and it just seems silly.
Agreed.
This word enmity, because if we just look at the situation of things here and we say, where is enmity? Well, at this point, right now, when God is speaking this, if you have Adam and you have Eve and you have God and you have the devil, the only place that there's not enmity is right here. I mean, there's peace between God, between Adam and the devil, between Eve and the devil. But there's
Oh, you see?
discord here between Adam and Eve, between Adam and God, between Eve and God. There's
See, he has to add another thing
Wow.
in order to make what he just said right.
Like, where is any of that in the text, right?
Mm-mm.
Like, it's just, yeah, you just gotta pretend. You squint really hard, and you look between the lines, and you just put stuff in there.
Yeah.
Is how you do this. Yeah. It's no, it's there is there's no sense from the text itself that there's enmity between God, the man, and the woman. It's just not there.
Mhm.
there's enmity all over the place except for right here. And the Lord says, "Nuh-uh. That's not how it's going to be. I will put enmity between you and the woman." The Lord wants the fight to be here. God will be on our side, and we will
So
be fighting against the devil.
another problem I have with this, that and it goes to the point that you brought up, is like based on his interpretation. Like, there's a couple things here that I'm thinking of. Like, first of all, uh, I believe, like, the Christian understanding, the Christian interpretation of this story and of the garden. I mentioned this earlier. This is a paradise that was created for the benefit of humankind. Like, it was for them. It was their place to live peacefully and in harmony and tranquility for all eternity, is what the garden was. And yet, how does that work if prior to this moment there's just enmity between all these people? Or is his point that by eating the fruit it's created the enmity? Maybe that's it. It's created the enmity between Adam and Eve and God, and they're on the devil's side in this moment, and now he's like, no, you're coming to my side and I want you to fight with the devil. Is that it?
And does that fit the context of a curse that's being pronounced? Like, it doesn't sound
Well,
like a
I
curse.
mean, he curses the woman, right? He just glossed right over that. And yeah, he doesn't curse the man, he curses the ground. So I don't know. It is I I think it's all very reaching um to see all this stuff in there. It also sounds like God just wants you to fight with someone. So, you might as well fight with the devil.
Yeah. It's like, gosh darn it, they ate of that tree. Now I gotta create this whole chaos.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. That'll make it better.
yeah. All right, let's see. I think there are a few things more that he says we can
When
comment
the
on.
Lord says, "I'll put
Okay.
enmity between thee and the woman," He's reversing things from how they are. He's undoing the first curse, and then it goes on and says, "And between thy seed and her seed." Now,
When he says he's undoing the first curse, is he talking about, because before that he says you will what he says before that is you are cursed, and you will you'll crawl on the ground on your belly and eat dust.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, he cursed the woman and said, I will, increase your pain in labor in childbirth, and your desire will be for your husband, your man, and he's going to rule over you.
Mm-hmm.
So is he which one of those curses is he reversing with this?
I think maybe what he had in mind was the so-called curse between the enmity between God and Adam and Eve.
Oh, which is not actually a curse. It's never mentioned or
It's never
yeah.
mentioned. Yeah.
So okay.
It's
You just
yeah.
right. Got it.
Neither one of these seeds makes sense. That the devil doesn't have any seed because the devil as a spirit does not have children. So that
they're gonna play fast and loose with that.
Oh yeah, they are.
And then also, I want you to talk about the whole plural seed versus singular seed and how that's not what they're trying to do here. But
does he suggest that some of these are plurals?
well, I think if he doesn't do it, I've heard it from others that have said
Okay.
that because it's
All right.
Singular seed,
right?
Then that means it was Jesus.
So now I'll just well, when if he says something about that, I'll
Sounds good.
but I hold on.
Okay.
I do want to say that this does make perfect sense if we understand this in the context of some of the stuff that's following, right? Where you've got the founding of this motif that's picked up on later in texts of God blessing and cursing different lineages.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you see in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, that Cain is at least implied to be the offspring of the snake and the woman. So, that does make some sense. And I don't have to twist myself into knots, attempting to establish that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Which he's gonna do for sure.
Of the devil. Okay. And also that the seed is her seed also doesn't make sense. Every other place in the Bible, when it talks about seed, it belongs to the man. Okay.
Well, that's
so this
just
already
not
is
that's just not true.
Nice.
Right. There are texts. Shoot, there are at least 3 or 4 places in the Hebrew Bible where it talks about the seed of a specific woman. And importantly, like I should say this. So this word here, this is zera in Hebrew. It means just basically seed, right? Seed that you plant in the ground. Semen, it means that too. But most of the time, a better translation for this word is offspring or progeny. So these are just your descendants. So a woman can have descendants, which is clearly how it's functioning in this text. And like this is the this is the same thing that Richard Carrier does when he botches Romans chapter 1 verse 3 by insisting that the word there is sperm or semen. It's not. I mean, I suppose it could be on a strictly literal reading of the text, but a sophisticated reader who understands the languages and the importance of context in reading this literature will know that this is just the Hebrew way of saying descendants.
And just because it's in the singular case.
Yeah, Right. So let's no.
Doesn't mean that it's
that
referring to
is
one descendant, because
no. It
yeah.
doesn't. It's just it's collective in the same way that the word Adam, which is the name that we've attached to the first man in the Hebrew Bible, can also function as a term for the collective, for all of humanity, is very often referred to in the biblical text as Adam.
And I've also heard too, like if you're a farmer and you need seed, you go to the store and you get seed. But
Oh,
if you tell your wife, "Hey, I'm gonna go to the store to get seed," she's not expecting that you're gonna come back with just one seed.
that's true, right?
Nor would you say, "Hey,
Well,
I need to go
this
get
works
some
in English.
seeds." Yeah, it
Yeah.
still works in English, so let's not force it. All right, let's see what else is there.
Bit of a furthering of the riddle, but let's just talk it through. So if the devil can't have children, there's not little baby demons running around. What is the seed, or what is the offspring of the devil? We identify two things: sin and death. The devil
So
came to kill and steal and
is there a text even anywhere that informs us that this is what the seed is of the devil? Like, I can't think of anything. It's certainly not, again, not native to the text. As I mentioned before, words we commonly translate as sin or iniquity are absent from the story. This is not this is death is not implied by the usage of the term here, nor anywhere as far as I am aware. This is just something that this guy made up because this is the only way that he can make sense of what's happening in this story to conform to his pre-existing theological model.
Right. And notice that he has to sort of paint this whole picture. I mean, I think we have a term for
Yeah,
that. It's
right.
called gaslighting. Creating an alternative reality where this makes sense. Because
Yes.
unless we do that, then it doesn't. So I think the last thing he's going to talk about is the bruising, and how
Okay.
that that
Yeah.
basically talks about the Messiah in the future.
Awesome. Of course.
So maybe if you could maybe summarize, because I mean we've heard that before, and bring this to a close.
Well, do you want to? I mean, we can just finish it up. That's fine. If
Okay,
unless
destroy.
you got to go, but I'm good.
I've got a few minutes.
Okay. Well, let's see let's see how far we can get with this.
Okay.
He came to bring to murder, to bring death, to bring to lie and deceive, and all these sorts of things. This is the sin of. This is the fruit, the seed of the devil. And what do we think about this? The seed of the woman. Now, this is an indication already
Right.
that Eve will have a child, but she will have a child without the help of Adam, without a man. Now, this is not yet a promise of the virgin birth, because it doesn't say that Eve will be.
Although there are
Yeah.
some who do
So
say that.
yeah. And again, I'll just repeat it. It just means offspring or descendants. So yeah.
Then we can skip up a little bit then.
Yeah, maybe skip up a little bit.
There, but this crushing means to deliver a death blow.
Okay, so this is. Do you want to back this
So
up
now-
just maybe a minute or 30 seconds to see what I want to see what he says about the crushing here. A little bit more maybe.
Here you go.
Yeah. Okay.
This is the seed, Christ. You shall bruise his heel. Now this crush, or this bruise, it reminds us of how it is with a serpent. Here is a serpent. Look, oh, my goodness. That's like a miraculously good serpent that I accidentally drew. Okay, I mean, not get carried away. Let me just leave it in its native glory. Woo.
Wow.
I'm excited. And you have a dude coming along, a guy who comes along, and this is a foot, and he's going to crush the head of the serpent while the serpent bruises his heel. So that's the picture that you're going to get there. But this crushing means to deliver a death blow.
See, you heard him say crush.
Yes.
So now the devil is going to
Okay, no, let him continue for a second, and then I'll say something.
Have a death blow delivered, a permanent death blow upon the head, but the seed is going to have a death blow dealt on his heel. In other words, it'll be a death blow, but not of the same sort. A death blow that doesn't end in death, but actually...
What?
I mean, if I get bit on my heel by a rattlesnake, I'm gonna, yeah.
The result of a death blow is that you die. That's what it is. You can't have a death blow that you recover from. Like, it's so dumb. And I think it was it might be Rashi when he dealt with this passage. He says, he says this, right? Like, you can kill a snake by stepping on its head, but he can also kill you by biting you on the heel. Like, you can die from that. Like, that's just as bad. It's like a saw off. It's
Right.
it's not a declaration of triumph for one over the other. It's just not.
Yeah, totally not.
ends in life. So now let's just take the whole thing together. The Lord says, I'll put enmity between you, Eve, and the woman, or between you, devil, and the woman, Eve, between your seed and her seed. It shall crush thy head. He shall crush thy head. So he will kill you, and you will crush his heel. You will deliver him a death blow that won't result in death. Now, one more thing to make note of, and this is to say that while Adam and Eve were strong and mighty according to their native creation, they did not have the strength to destroy the devil. And that the devil, as the highest of the angels and spirit beings, that capacity, that strength, that power belongs only to God.
Like, where did you come up with that?
So that is, all of that is just not in the story, right? It just
So that
craziness.
if the seed of the woman is crushing the head of the devil, then that child is going to be also God. So we have already here in this first verse, in this beautiful text.
I was going to say that, don't you get the impression that the whole problem with hey, now that they've had from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, they cannot partake of this other tree, which would make them otherwise immortal? That part of the dilemma, at least from God, from Yahweh's perspective, is that perhaps divine people are not a good idea, right? Humans that are also divine, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, it's not I would say, like, for Yahweh, it's certainly not the preferred outcome, right? And in this particular story, like, because suddenly they're not up to the task of looking after his garden anymore. So it's they've become functionless for that task. So yeah, but I don't know. I just don't even know what to,
Yeah, I know,
there's
right?
just, on so many levels, like, you just have to read into, and maybe we need to shut it down. But I think, like, just on so many levels, you have to read so much into the text that just is not there in order to make some kind of connection between this and the messianic prophecies in the New Testament. Now, I will also say that this is just part and parcel of what everyone was doing, in the first century. This is just the way the people, early Jewish people read their literature. So I'm not saying, don't hear me saying that this is something that the New Testament is doing duplicitously, or out of order, or inappropriately, right? Like, this is just the way this literature worked. But importantly, you have to be really, really, really creative to make these connections.
And
If
I
you're
think that
interested,
I was going to say that in antiquity, perhaps would it be right to say that it would have been okay for you to do this sort of Mishnah, right? Where you're kind
yeah,
of reading or
midrash,
adding another
this midrash,
midrash,
yeah,
another layer, interpretive layer upon interpretive layer. But it's when you say, no, 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 this is what that means. This is
yeah,
the
right,
interpretation, and therefore this doctrine. That's when the ancients would have been like, wait a minute, what are you talking about?
yeah. So if you're
So,
interested in knowing what these texts said in their, in their original context, and then how the biblical writers handled them over time, that's great. But that's not, you don't get that from just reading the New Testament and smashing that back on this story. I would say the story is actually much more interesting and much more fun in its own right, in its own context, without the layers,
right.
right? So and that's what that's what I'm about. I'm really interested in stripping off the layers, just like that snake.
That's right. Yeah. Just like it. Yeah. Well, Dr.
Oh,
Kipp, this has been so much fun.
it's
And
been
I
a
want to
lot of
thank you
fun.
for
Yes,
allowing me to come in on your channel and do this together. This has been great. Very.
absolutely. Yeah, no, this has been fabulous. So, I will just say to I'll do like a little outro here, but before I go, I'll just say, everyone, if you haven't already, you should subscribe to Apostate of Mine. He does some really, really good stuff over there, along with his partner, Apostate Ann. And Mark is also a regular on the Blasphemers Bible, which is every Saturday on Aaron Ra's channel. And I rarely ever show up, but he's usually there. So you can check him out there. And I know that that he has like a terrific, does some really terrific stuff with the with the Spanish speaking secular community as well. So if all of that stuff, if any of that stuff appeals to you, then seriously, uh go check out Apostate of Mine. Thank you so much for suggesting this topic and for hanging out with me and talking about these texts, Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Kipp. And I do want to extend an invitation for those listening here. Dr. Kipp does have courses that you can
Oh,
have
I do.
access to, MVP courses. In fact, you are teaching, there is one right now that you can learn a lot more about this
Yeah,
same information,
and many
um,
more things. Yes.
and much more. So you are the man.
Oh, thanks, man. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
See you, Mark.
Bye.